Somewhere in the city, there is a walking time bomb. Stress upon stress is building inside him. It will explode in one desperate act. Can scientists and investigators sift through the debris and catch a mad bomber? Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. An explosion is difficult to investigate. There are many possible causes, many possible targets. When the only eyewitness is in a coma, it's even more complicated. It falls to detectives and forensic scientists to make sense of all the shattered bits and pieces. Rush hour in Toronto's financial district. Thousands of cars and people are packing the streets of the city. In an underground parking lot, a limousine chauffeur is startled by an explosion. A mail truck has blown up. The mail truck driver is engulfed in flames and is so traumatized that he actually tries to jump back into his burning vehicle. Miraculously, he is the only casualty. As an ambulance rushes him to the hospital, a bomb expert heads to the scene.
On my way down there, I'm thinking, you know, it's a Canada Post truck. It's probably many packages in the back. Quite possibly one of these packages have detonated or exploded. I'm thinking at the time that possibly there might be secondary devices, either within the truck or around the area. That was my primary concern.
He scours the area using a special mirror device, but he detects no secondary explosive. Now the daunting task of trying to figure out what caused the explosion begins. Was it a bomb? If so, what kind? And especially, how was it detonated?
You're looking for a power source, because every time there's an explosive, you need a detonator to set the explosive off. Now, to set that detonator off, you need a battery, you need wires, and some kind of a switching device, whether it's a clock, a toggle switch, a pressure release switch. You're looking for the seat of the explosion.
The mail truck driver is identified as Bruno Vitali. He's 38, a widowed father who lives with his daughter and his mother. He has severe burns over 90% of his body. His pain is almost lethal. Because of the injuries to the driver, homicide is called in. Who was the target of the explosion, and who is responsible for it? Is it the work of some fanatic as in Oklahoma City, or an act of international terrorism like the World Trade Center? Detectives discover that the office tower directly above the explosion houses numerous foreign embassies as well as hundreds of offices. Then something else grabs the investigators' attention. One of the offices in the tower belongs to a mining firm recently involved in a huge trading scandal.
This was the week that Bre-X blew up in its enormity, and so many people suffered such fantastic losses there. Was this Bre-X related? Was this someone, a shareholder, sending a message to someone, i.e. the big banks, or could have been a fanatic involved with sending a message to whatever audience he might have been targeting?
The first person that detectives interview is the limo driver who saved Bruno Vitali. It turns out he is the chauffeur for the CEO of one of Canada's major banks, whose office was immediately above the bomb blast. Was he the target? The limo driver explains he was waiting downstairs for his boss when he noticed the mail truck driver talking to some delivery man. He remembers seeing the delivery man giving something to the mail truck driver and then drive away. The limo driver says he had just turned away when he heard the explosion and saw the burning man running out of the truck. That's when he'd rushed over to save him. Since this delivery man was the last known person to interact with the victim, police are anxious to locate him. As doctors fight to save Bruno Vitali's life, investigators encounter Bruno's daughter and his irate mother.
She wanted the police to investigate, but she wanted to tell us how to do the investigation. She was going to tell us where we should look and where we shouldn't look.
She tells them her son Bruno is their sole support. He works 2 full-time jobs as a postal driver and a delivery man. And he devotes all his spare time to coaching his daughter Sonia, a sprinter and budding Olympic hopeful. Bruno's mother says her son is a saint. He has no enemies, everyone loves him. She insists that detectives find out who did this to her son. In a search for more clues, Homicide checks out the security camera in the underground garage.
You can see the billowing cloud starting to come out, and then you can see the postal worker actually entering the picture frame. His entire backside, from his scalp all the way down, had been incinerated.
But because of the camera angle, the corner of the garage where the mail truck actually exploded is out of frame. As for the victim, his burns are so severe and his pain so intense, doctors try something rare. They put Bruno Vitali into an induced coma. As precious time ticks away, investigators wrestle with too many possibilities. Is this BRIEX related, embassy related, or the random act of a madman? What kind of bomb was it? And will there be more? An horrific explosion in a postal truck in a busy downtown underground garage has left a postal worker with such extensive burns that to save his life, doctors have put him into an induced coma. Still searching for clues as to how the explosion was detonated, a bomb expert examines how the postal truck buckled when the blast occurred. Meanwhile, detectives locate Wayne Ng, the delivery man who may have been the last person to talk with Bruno Vitali prior to the explosion. When detectives question Ng, he is defensive. He keeps his answers short, making detectives work to get his story. Ng claims he hadn't even known there'd been an explosion till he'd heard it on the news. He insists he hardly knew Bruno. Bruno kept to himself. But on the day of the explosion, Bruno was acting differently, more talkative. According to Ng, Bruno proudly showed him how much mail he had already collected. When detectives ask Ng whether he gave Bruno anything, Ng answers, just a cigarette. He says he offered Bruno his lighter, but Bruno wanted matches. But Bruno's daughter says her father is an athlete and a confirmed non-smoker. He would never have asked anyone for a cigarette or a light. Is Ing telling the truth, or is he trying to mislead the police about his encounter with Bruno?
I asked him if he would ever agree to go to a polygraph. Being the last person to see him, we'd like to rule him out. I got a call back the next day from a lawyer from this co-worker stating that he did not agree to going for a polygraph and he didn't want to be interviewed by the police anymore.
The detective's suspicions are raised even more when a check into Ing's background reveals he has a previous weapons charge and a prison record. Meanwhile, the bomb expert has finished his preliminary investigation.
So after looking for different devices that possibly might have been used regarding batteries, wires, detonators, explosives, no containers at all that would indicate a high explosive, determined that it was a gas, probably a gas vapor explosion.
This supports the detective's finding. Though the truck is a diesel-powered vehicle, he could smell gasoline. At this point, the case is turned over to the fire inspector.
When I arrived at the scene, I concurred with their finding, and I saw no evidence of cratering. The gaseous explosion is different from a hard explosion in that there's no definite seat. The vapor ignites over an area, and so there's no cratering effect as a result.
Every possible piece of evidence is put into bags and jars to be sent to the Center of Forensic Science for analysis. A gas explosion makes it more likely that this is the work of an amateur. That's when the case takes another amazing turn. The detective learns that the injured driver's daughter, Sonia, has recently been charged with second-degree murder. Sonia had been walking home from track practice with some friends when an argument suddenly turned violent. A girl was stabbed to death. A witness said they saw Sonia with a knife. Sonia was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Though she maintained her innocence, her case has yet to go to trial. About a month before the explosion, Bruno had a nasty run-in with the slain girl's uncle. Then early one morning, Sonia thought she heard a noise in the garage. Bruno checked it out. Nothing was missing. But it really shook him that someone was possibly stalking them, looking for revenge. Detectives now add revenge as a possible motive. Meanwhile, Fire Inspector Linda Williams is working on the probable cause of the explosion in Bruno's truck.
As I was going through the debris, systematically, piece by piece, piece of mail by piece of mail, I encountered an empty pop can, and I smelled it, and it smelled of a flammable liquid. An explosion occurs when the flammable liquid is within the explosive range. For gasoline, that's between roughly 1.4% and 7.6% volume mixed in air. When an ignition source is applied to that vapor, the explosion happens very rapidly.
Exhibit A, an ordinary pop can. Who could have placed it in the mail truck, and why? 2.5 months have passed since a tragic explosion in his mail truck left driver Bruno Vitali in a coma. As his daughter tells the press, he slept through his 39th birthday, through Father's Day, and through the Olympic trials they had hoped to watch on TV together. Detectives are narrowing down the suspects. The delivery man, Wayne Ing, has been cleared, and so has the slain teenager's uncle. So detectives go back to ground zero.
Then we go back to the last person in the vehicle when the explosion occurred. He can't talk to us, but certain injuries and what happened around him does start to speak for itself, and we have the other witnesses we relied upon. We couldn't rule out the driver as setting off this explosion by himself.
The next clue comes from the fire inspector. She had submitted a normal-sized pop can for analysis, and it came back that there was gasoline in it. Based on that, police now suspect that the victim, now a potential suspect, probably had gas in the can and probably threw it on top of the male inside and then ignited it with a match. But why would Bruno Vitali have set off an explosion in his own truck? More than ever, investigators want to talk to Bruno Vitali. But when Bruno finally regains consciousness, his mother vehemently refuses to let detectives talk to him.
I'm sort of set back. My final person that was there at the explosion, who I believed and disbelieved at the same time that he was a victim, now has a lawyer on board, which is highly unusual for a victim, and the family will not let me talk to him.
Bruno Vitali, the victim, is now Bruno Vitali, the prime suspect. Police wait until Bruno Vitali is released from the hospital and sent home. Then they attempt to book him.
We had seen pictures of him when he was in fine health. He was a very robust person. The person I saw looks almost collapsed into himself. He had a ball cap on, but you can just see the damage to his scalp and the skin. And he had these large, heavy industrial gloves on that were protecting where the skin rehabilitation was taking place. It was a very diminished person that we saw over here.
Bruno Vitali is arrested and charged with 2 counts of arson to endanger life and to damage property, and 1 count of setting an explosive. But because Bruno has no criminal record and because of his injuries, he's released back to his family. Police do not consider him a threat. But shortly after, his mother calls police to say Bruno has disappeared. Meanwhile, fire expert Linda Williams has determined that Bruno is the only one who could have ignited the gasoline.
The driver of the vehicle had to be there at the time of the ignition in order to be caught in the explosion and fire. Frequently, arsonists will spread gasoline around, wait for a little bit too long, ignite it, and get caught in the subsequent explosion and get burned, seriously burned as a result.
Then one day, out of the blue, Bruno phones the detective. He has slipped into the United States, where he is gambling big time. Though his 2 jobs earned him $80,000 a year, he has never had enough money. And his daughter's trial is further draining him financially. Obsessed with getting rich fast, he has lost everything. He's depressed, paranoid, and broke. Over the course of several phone calls and fearing that Bruno is now out of control, the detective persuades him to come back to Toronto and surrender. But on 3 separate occasions with the police on high alert, Bruno doesn't show up. Then one day, when the detective isn't expecting him, Bruno Vitali simply walks into the police station and gives himself up. Based on everything they can piece together, this is what investigators think happened. Bruno was a man whose main goal in life was to take care of his family. He worked 2 jobs and devoted the rest of his time coaching his daughter, who dreamed of making it to the Olympics. But when his daughter was charged with second-degree murder, stress began to build inside him. The stress grew as daily he saw his daughter give up on her dreams. He was convinced that his daughter was innocent and was determined to spare no expense to prove it. But it was draining him financially. On top of that, he had a domineering mother who wouldn't let him sell his house to pay for his daughter's defense. He was terrified of seeing his family totally fall apart. So Bruno worked out a plan. He knew the Workplace Safety Insurance Act. He knew the union regulation about transporting hazardous materials. He counted on the insurance money to save his family. So he made sure there was a witness who knew his truck was full of mail. Then he asked for a cigarette and a match.
He wanted to remove the external stressors on him and his family's life. He felt that he had to get the legal defense fund up. The insurance would have kicked in. The union would have grieved against the corporation for these hazardous materials. There would have been a major settlement. His family would have been taken care of, and he wouldn't be subjected to all this enormous pressures and the changes he was going through.
So when Bruno Vitali went back to his burning truck, he wasn't disoriented. He wanted to die. Believing that his setting off the explosion was a one-time occurrence, the courts took a humane approach. Under a doctor's care, Bruno Vitali pleaded guilty to 3 charges of arson and received 3 years probation. His daughter Sonia was found innocent of the murder charges against her. Bruno Vitali was a man who thought his choices were between life and death, but he ended up in a living hell. The stories on Exhibit A are based on true cases. The forensic scientists and investigators are the actual individuals who worked on the cases. The names of the victims are fictitious.